Hey guys, it's Jeff from Jeff Built, and on today's episode of the Snowmobile Gokart series, we're going to talk about all of the stuff that came in the mail for the build. So, last time we just ran through the engine and what the power plant of the Gokart was going to be, and just the overall thoughts. So now I ordered almost all of the components that I'm gonna need for the build. We're just waiting on two things: the primary clutch and the secondary clutch. Three things actually, and the belt drive, the belt that connects the pulleys. But everything else is here, and we're just gonna run through all of those things. Like we addressed in the last video, this is the Rotax Type 467 Snowmobile engine off of a Ski-Doo formula. I think it's 1991, 1992, something like that. But since the last video, we got two VM 40mm carburetors from Mikuni. They're 40 millimeters, which matches the inside diameter of the oil injection pump. So these aren't the original size of the carburetors for the engine. The original size was 34 millimeters. So I'm planning on rejetting this, playing around with the jetting and the oil injection system to make sure that this engine is lubricated well. But I thought I might be able to get a little bit more performance if we get bigger carburetors. Now, I didn't go 44 millimeters or anything like that, because then you'd have a bottleneck at the actual intake manifold at the injection pump. Right here, we maximize airflow and there's no bottleneck. The last setup was bottlenecked by the carburetors. This doesn't have a bottleneck because the intake, it's essentially port matched. So the only thing I need for these carburetors is they didn't come with chokes. So I'm gonna have to buy chokes for the carburetors. And they didn't come with throttle cables. So I'll have to get a throttle cable and also buy or rig up something to pull the oil injection lever as well. Because this oil injection lever alters how much oil is injected based on the RPM. So it's important that this is controlled with the throttle. Some other things. I bought these off of eBay. They were about $60. So I thought that was really good for two 40 millimeter carburetors. And whenever I opened these things up, I expected there to be a lot of corrosion, but there wasn't at all. It was there was no fuel run through these things, or if there was, it was drained out as soon as these carburetors were taken off the snowmobile, because they're in really good condition. So I'm very satisfied with this deal because I lucked out and I got good carburetors. So this is the ignition system. This right here is the CDI, and it connects with the engine. And so basically what this does, this reads the signal from the magneto and tells the coil when to fire the spark plugs. So this plug right here connects to the engine, and then connected to the CDI via this plug is the ignition coil. So this ignition coil fires for both cylinders, and attached to these ignition coils are NGK spark plug caps. Thing is the cooling system. So I bought these radiators off of eBay for $20, and they are off of a YZ 450 dirt bike. I'm planning on running these radiators in parallel. So what that means is that I'll take a hose from the outlet of the engine, have a Y that splits the output of the engine, and goes into the top of each one of these radiators, right? And so then that fluid will run through each one of these radiators at the same time, come out the bottom, and then join again and run into back into the engine. And then it'll be pumped through the cylinders, out the engine. It will split, go through each one of these radiators, and then back in. So my reason for doing that initially is to make sure that the coolant circulates fast enough. If I run these in series, then I risk there being too much resistance because you have to run it through one and then back through the other. But these radiators were in pretty good condition, especially for $20. I expected them to be a whole lot more bent up. So I'll just have to straighten out some of these fins, and then these radiators would be good. So now we're gonna talk about some more of the things that I'm gonna recycle from the old go-kart. So I'm keeping the wheels. These are 11 by 7.1 by 5 go-kart wheels and tires, aluminum rims. These are going to be recycled for the new go-kart because they've barely been used. I've only driven the other go-kart a few times, and they're good quality. And I got them for a good price on eBay like a couple years ago. So I'm going to reuse these. We'll be able to reuse the hubs for the front and rear. These happen to be the rear ones that fit in these wheels. So we'll keep the hubs. We're going to recycle. These used to be the old axle bearings. And these were the old axle hangers. These will be recycled, but they're not going to be used on the actual axle. These will be used on the jack shaft. These old ones will be used on the jack shaft that is going to be attached to the secondary clutch on the new go-kart. And I have the old axle that will be used as the jack shaft. I'm going to cut these off and then mount these wherever I decide to position the new jack shaft. Then these are the old, like, I guess, rigid A-arm type things. So I'm gonna I have the old spindles and the old spindle holders, which I'm gonna be repurposing for the new go-kart. Just chop them off here and then repurpose them for the new go-kart. There's gonna be new steering, front end geometry and everything like that for the new go-kart. So this is the seat for the go-kart. It's going to be repurposed from the other go-kart. It's a little bit dirty. It has dust on it and stuff like that, some old mounting holes, but overall it's a pretty sturdy seat. I'm not going to pay like $60 for another seat whenever I already have one that'll work right here. I'll mount it differently. I'm not going to reuse these mounting holes, but it fit me really well. It was tight and didn't let me slide around, so I'm just going to repurpose this and use it for the old go-kart. I'm pretty sure it's like fiberglass, so it's pretty light. So here's the braking system, or like roughly what it's going to be. There's actually obviously going to have to be a linkage between this master cylinder and the pedals, so that this whole thing works. But this right here is a 1/2 inch like go-kart master cylinder off of eBay. It was super cheap, but it's actually works well. I had it on the other go-kart and it pumps fluid well, holds pressure. And then this is the caliper that I decided to go with is a 4-piston Z1000 Kawasaki Z1000 front caliper. I assume that this is going to have plenty of braking power for the new go-kart. Okay, now let's talk about the expansion chamber. So I also bought this expansion chamber right here used off of eBay, and then I bought this Y pipe used off of eBay. And so the problem I was running into whenever I was laying up the frame, I was mocking up like how big it needs to be. I mean, how long it has to be, how wide, the general dimensions. There was a coupling here. So these were separate parts. The Y pipe and the expansion chamber were separate parts initially. But there was like a big coupler right here that took up like 2-3 inches, and I'm trying to conserve space and make this go-kart like as short as possible, just because it's going to be really long because of the engine and the CVT, and then me sitting comfortably in the front. So I'm trying to keep it as small as possible. And the way that this expansion pipe sits, this big U takes up a lot of space, like a foot in the chassis. So I'm gonna have to angle it and do some funny things to make sure that I can consolidate some space, and this go-kart doesn't turn out to be like super long, because then it will affect turning characteristics and things like that. So I decided to chop off the coupler on both sides, and because they would attach and be held together by springs. Decided to chop that off and just make it one solid piece. So I welded this up so that they're solid and they're not adjustable. Made sure I was at the correct angle, exactly how I wanted it, well, approximately, and then I chopped it off and welded them together. So now this is one piece, and it's also shorter, but it's more rigid. So I'm gonna have to make some type of mount for this side, because I don't want this part to be stressed whenever it's actually on the go-kart. So the other thing that we're gonna reuse is the steering column. I already have bearings that work for the steering column, and it's a little bit short, but I think it's gonna work. There's an old clutch cable, which we won't need to use now because we're using a CVT. And then the old steering wheel, which I think we might be able to reuse. What I'm gonna do is probably just chop this off, create my own mounting. So next we have the actual axle. So this is what's gonna actually be attached to the hubs right here that I explained earlier, which is gonna be connected to the wheels, of course. This is new from BMI karts, along with some new 1-inch axle hangers and bearings to go along with it. I just decided to go new with the axle because it's going to be supporting a lot more weight. The jack shaft, yes, it will be supporting a lot of torque from the engine because it's connected directly to the CVT, but this is going to be holding the power of the engine as well as the weight of the kart. I didn't want to go with a 1 1/4 inch axle because I already had hubs for this size axle, so that would be another expense, and I thought just by getting another axle, it would do just fine, as I am shortening the wheelbase. Shortening the wheelbase of the go-kart width-wise, so there's not going to be as much torque on the outer parts of this axle because the wheels are going to be closer to the frame. Also, the frame is going to be wider than the old go-kart, so that's going to help a lot, as these brackets will span like a wider distance on the axle. Along with this hangers, new bolts for the hanger, and then some, I don't know what this is, keyway, 1/4 inch keyway or something like that, but it will work for the jack shaft and for the axle. So I'll be able to use this as long as for the hubs, because I was running low and I was using really small pieces. I don't want anything to shear, as this is going to be holding a lot of power. So this is great that they've included this. So this is the aluminum engine mount that will bolt onto the actual engine. There's mounting points on the engine to bolt through here and then up here. I cleaned these up. These are, I'm assuming, casted aluminum. Yes, they're casted because here's like the places to pour the metal. And then these are steel plates that bolt onto here with 6mm bolts. And so then on this mounting surface right here, I will weld steel tubing out this way, and then chop it off and coat this notch this for the frame, but this will solid mount the engine to the frame. And then lastly, the frame of the go-kart will be built from 1-inch OD mild steel tubing. The thickness of this tubing is 0.065 inches, and this is what the actual frame will be constructed of. I thought this was a good choice because it was pretty cheap on Summit Racing. I bought like 10 or something 4-foot pieces of this tubing right here, and I think that's going to be plenty. So that is a rundown of all of the parts that I've accumulated so far, and a plan of how I'm gonna sort of begin to build the frame. I have all the tubing. I'm just waiting on the welder, and the primary and secondary clutch. The primary clutch attaches to the engine, and the secondary clutch attaches to the jack shaft. And then there's a belt that runs in between them. And as the engine RPM increases, the clutches shift and create a different gear ratio as the RPMs change. So I'm waiting for that whole transmission assembly to come, and then I can start laying out where the jack shaft is going to be, exactly where I want to mount the engine. I have a rough idea from some measurements I made with an old CVT system that I have, but just to make sure with the new belt, the new transmission, I want to make sure that all the distances are correct before I begin to weld the frame, because I don't want to get in a situation where I weld up this frame and then I have to do some funky stuff to make everything work, and then with doing funky stuff I have to compromise some strength and efficiency, safety, and things like that. So I'd rather have everything and be able to plan everything out to make sure that this go-kart is as safe as possible, as fast as possible, and I build as efficiently as possible. So next time, whenever the welder gets here, so next time we're gonna have the welder, we're gonna have all the parts, just waiting on the stuff for the transmission, like I said, and then we'll begin to construct the frame, tack everything together, and start laying out the parts, making the engine mounts, mounting the seat, mounting the jack shaft, and then after that we'll lay out the geometry for the steering, and then just keep moving from there.